The courtroom was silent enough to hear a pin drop, but the loudest sound in the room was the smug confidence radiating from Isabella. She sat in the front row, adjusting her Prada sunglasses, already picturing her life as the wife of the city's wealthiest tech mogul. She watched Richard humiliate his wife of 20 years, stripping her of every asset, every penny, and every shred of dignity. Richard thought he had won. Isabella knew she had won. But then, Judge Whitman adjusted his spectacles, looked over the paperwork, and asked a single, quiet question that froze the blood in Richard's veins. "Mr. Sterling, you claim this conglomerate is yours. So why does the incorporation document list the sole proprietor as the woman you're trying to evict?" The gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art was the kind of event where the air conditioning smelled like expensive perfume and old money. Arthur Sterling stood near the Temple of Denda, a glass of vintage Krug champagne in his hand, holding court. He was 48, handsome in a way that money could buy, teeth veneered to perfection, hair plugged and dyed a rich chestnut, and a bespoke Brioni suit that cost more than most people's cars. Next to him, clinging to his arm like a decorative vine, was Isabella. She was 24, a former catalogue model with ambition that far outstripped her resume. She wore a scarlet dress that was technically appropriate for black tie, but cut low enough to signal exactly why she was there. She laughed at Arthur's jokes before the punchlines landed. She touched his bicep every time a photographer's flash went off. And standing 20 feet away, near a tray of untouched hors d'oeuvres, was Catherine Sterling. Catherine was 45, though she looked tired enough to be 60. She wore a navy dress that was elegant, but 3 seasons old. She held a glass of sparkling water, watching her husband parade his mistress in front of the city's elite. It wasn't a secret anymore. In New York's high society, secrets were currency, and Arthur had spent this one lavishly. "He looks happy," a voice said beside her. Catherine didn't turn. She knew the voice. It was Silas Blackwood, Arthur's corporate attorney, a man who had the moral compass of a great white shark, yet had always treated Catherine with a strange, distant respect. "He looks expensive, Silas," Catherine corrected, her voice soft. "There's a difference." Silas took a sip of his scotch. "The IPO is launching in 2 weeks. Sterling Dynamics is projected to open at $60 a share. He's going to be a billionaire, Catherine, on paper and in practice." "I know," she said. "He's going to file," Silas said, dropping his voice. "After the bell rings on Wall Street. He wants to clear the IPO first so the divorce news doesn't spook the investors. He's planning to offer you the house in Connecticut and a monthly stipend. That's it." Catherine finally turned to look at the lawyer. Her eyes were grey, intelligent, and currently devoid of fear. "He thinks Sterling Dynamics is his." "It's his name on the building," Silas pointed out, though he was watching her reaction carefully. "It is," Catherine agreed. She looked back at Arthur, who was now whispering something into Isabella's ear that made her throw her head back in performative ecstasy. "He forgets who built the foundation that building stands on." The truth was, Arthur Sterling was a salesman. He was charismatic, loud, and fantastic at shaking hands. But 20 years ago, when they were eating ramen in a basement apartment in Queens, Arthur couldn't code his way out of a paper bag. It was Catherine. Catherine with her master's in computer science from MIT. Catherine who stayed up until 4 a.m. writing the proprietary algorithms that optimized logistics for shipping companies, who had built the engine. Arthur was the hood and the paint job. Catherine was the motor. But over the years, as the money poured in, Arthur had slowly pushed her into the background. "You're too quiet for the board meetings, Cat," he'd say, Stay home with the kids. Let me handle the sharks. So she had. She raised their son, Leo, who was now away at Yale. She managed the household, and she let Arthur convince the world he was a genius. "He's going to try to destroy you, Catherine," Silas warned, stepping closer. Isabella has been in his ear. She wants the penthouse. She wants the Hamptons estate. She wants the title of Mrs. Sterling. Arthur is terrified of losing her, so he's going to give her everything you own. Catherine took a sip of her water. Let him try. Across the room, Arthur locked eyes with her. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He looked at her with the cold, bored expression of a man looking at an old piece of furniture he was waiting for the movers to haul away. He whispered something to Isabella, and the mistress looked over at Catherine. Isabella smiled. It was a cruel, pitying thing. She raised her champagne glass in a mock toast to Catherine. Catherine didn't blink. She didn't raise her glass. She simply watched them, her mind not on the humiliation, but on a filing cabinet in a storage facility in New Jersey, and a document signed 19 years ago that Arthur had been too busy drinking to read properly. 3 weeks later, the papers arrived. They didn't come with a conversation. Arthur didn't sit her down and explain that he had fallen out of love. He was too cowardly for that. Instead, a process server disguised as a flower delivery man knocked on the door of their Tribeca penthouse at 10:00 a.m. on a Tuesday. Catherine signed for the flowers, a manila envelope thick with legal threats. She took the envelope to the marble kitchen island. The penthouse was silent. It was a masterpiece of modern design, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River, white oak floors, and art that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Arthur loved this apartment because it felt like a showroom. Catherine hated it because it felt like a museum where you weren't allowed to touch anything. She opened the envelope. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Petitioner, Arthur J. Sterling. Respondent, Catherine M. Sterling. She flipped to the proposed settlement. It was insulting. It was beyond insulting. It was an act of war. Arthur was offering her the vacation cottage in Connecticut, which needed a new roof, her 2022 Audi Q7, and alimony of $5,000 a month for 3 years. In exchange, he kept the Tribeca penthouse, valued at $14 million, the Hamptons estate, valued at $22 million, the Aspen Ski Lodge, the Ferrari, the Porsche Panamera, and the vintage Jaguar. 100% of his stock and equity in Sterling Dynamics. He was worth, according to the recent IPO, roughly $1.2 billion. And he was offering her less than a fraction of a percent. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Arthur. Don't make this hard, Cat. My lawyers are the best in the city. Take the deal. You'll be comfortable. If you fight me, I'll drain you dry. I'll make sure you end up back in Queens. Catherine stared at the phone. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She laughed. She went to her study, a small room Arthur rarely entered, and unlocked the bottom drawer of her desk. She pulled out a burner phone she had bought a month ago. She dialed a number she had memorized. Law offices of Tobias and Finch, a crisp voice answered. I need to speak to Harrison Tobias, Catherine said. Mr. Tobias is in court and tell him Catherine Sterling is calling. Tell him the sleeping partner is awake. There was a pause, a click, and 10 seconds later, a deep, gravelly voice came on the line. Harrison Tobias was a legend in New York. He didn't handle divorces. He handled corporate assassinations. He was the man you called when you wanted to burn a company to the ground and salt the earth. Catherine, Harrison said. Did he do it? He filed this morning, she said. He offered me the Connecticut shack. Predictable, Harrison grunted. Did he list Sterling Dynamics as a marital asset? He listed it as premarital separate property based on the concept, Catherine read from the document. He claims he invented the core concept before we met. And the patent? He thinks the patent is in the company's name, Catherine said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Excellent. And does the mistress know the timeline? Isabella? She thinks Arthur is a god. She has no idea he's standing on a trapdoor. All right, Harrison said. We don't respond immediately. Let him sweat. Let him think you're crying in a corner. Let him parade the girl around. We need him arrogant. We need him to feel so safe that he testifies under oath that the company is entirely his creation. He will, Catherine said. His ego is the only thing bigger than his bank account. Then we wait for the deposition. I'll start drafting the subpoenas. Catherine. Yes? Don't let them see you bleed. Catherine looked out the window at the Hudson River, grey and churning. I'm not bleeding, Harrison. I'm sharpening the knife. That evening, Arthur came home to pack his final bags. He wasn't alone. Isabella was waiting in the car downstairs, but he was on the phone with her as he stormed through the bedroom. Yeah, babe, I'm grabbing the Patek Philippe watches now. No, she's not here. Probably out crying to her mother. He laughed. He threw his suits into a Louis Vuitton duffel bag. Catherine was sitting in the living room, reading a book, when he came out. He stopped, startled by her calmness. I'm leaving, he announced, puffing out his chest. I can see that, Catherine said, not looking up from her page. Did you read the papers? I skimmed them. Arthur sneered. You should sign them. Isabella and I are looking at new properties in Monaco. We need this done quickly. Don't be a burden, Cat. You were always a burden. A dead weight on my ambition. Catherine closed her book. It was The Art of War, though the dust jacket was from a romance novel. She stood up. She was shorter than him, but in that moment she seemed to loom. Arthur, she said, do you remember who named the company? Arthur blinked, confused by the non sequitur. I did. Sterling Dynamics. It's my name. No, Catherine said softly. You wanted to call it Logitech Pro. I told you Sterling sounded like old money. I told you it sounded like something people could trust. So you named it. Big deal. I built it. He hoisted the bag over his shoulder. Goodbye, Catherine. The lawyers will be in touch. Try not to spend all the alimony on cat food. He walked out the door and slammed it. Catherine waited until the elevator dinged. Then she walked to the window and looked down. She saw Arthur exit the building and get into the back of a waiting black Maybach. She saw the window roll down, and she saw Isabella lean over and kiss him, looking up at the penthouse window with a gloating smirk. Catherine placed her hand against the cool glass. Enjoy the ride, Isabella, she whispered. The crash is going to be spectacular. For the next 3 months, Arthur Sterling lived like a man who had already won the lottery, the Super Bowl, and the presidency all in one afternoon. With the divorce proceedings moving at the glacial pace of the New York legal system, Arthur felt no immediate pressure. In his mind, Catherine was already a ghost, a faint smudge on the ledger of his magnificent life that his lawyers would eventually erase with a check. The IPO of Sterling Dynamics was a roaring success. The bell rang on Wall Street, confetti rained down, and the stock opened at 64 $64 a share. By noon, Arthur was worth $1.4 billion on paper. He celebrated by purchasing a 180-foot super yacht. He named it the Bella, painting Isabella's name across the stern in gold leaf. It's beautiful, baby, Isabella cooed as they toured the master suite of the yacht, docked in Miami for the weekend. She was recording everything on her phone, broadcasting their lavish lifestyle to her growing army of social media followers. But are you sure we can spend this? The lawyers said something about freezing assets. Arthur laughed, popping the cork on a bottle of Dom Perignon. Silas handles the boring stuff. Besides, this is my money. Catherine never worked a day in the last 15 years. No judge in the world is going to give her half of a company she didn't build. We'll give her a few million to shut her up, and the rest is ours. Isabella smiled, that predatory glint returning to her eyes. Good, because I don't want her smelling like my money. Back in New York, the narrative was being carefully crafted. Arthur hired a PR firm to paint a very specific picture in the press. Articles began appearing in Business Insider and the New York Post. The Visionary Bachelor, how Arthur Sterling built an empire alone. The Dead Weight, why high-value men outgrow their starter wives. The articles were cruel. They painted Catherine as a frumpy, unsupportive housewife who sat on the couch eating bonbons while Arthur toiled away in the garage inventing the future. They claimed she had no technical literacy and was merely a domestic passenger on his journey to greatness. Catherine read every single article. She sat in the small, two-bedroom apartment she had rented in Brooklyn. She had refused to stay in the Connecticut cottage Arthur offered, and organized her files. The apartment was sparse: a table, a laptop, a printer, and boxes. Dozens of bankers' boxes, stacked floor to ceiling. Harrison Tobias sat across from her, his sleeves rolled up, a half-eaten bagel on a paper plate between them. "He's hanging himself in the press," Harrison noted, tapping a printed copy of the New York Post article, where Arthur claimed he wrote the source code for Sterling Dynamics on a napkin in a diner in 1999. "This interview, it's admissible. If we can prove he's lying about the origin of the code, this article proves he's a liar to the public, too." "He didn't write it on a napkin," Catherine said, her voice devoid of emotion. She pulled a binder from a stack labeled 1998, the beginning. "He was hungover. I wrote the code on our shared desktop computer while he was sleeping off a bender. I have the timestamps. I have the original hard drive." Harrison grinned. It was a terrifying expression. "And the incorporation documents?" "Arthur thinks he incorporated the company in Delaware in 2005, Catherine said. "Because that's when he started paying attention." "But the original LLC, the one that holds the intellectual property rights." "Show me again," Harrison said, savoring the moment. Catherine opened a plastic sleeve. Inside was a yellowed, fragile piece of paper from 20 years ago. It was a standard LLC formation document from the state of New York. Entity name, Sterling Logistics Solutions, precursor to Sterling Dynamics. Date, November 4th, 1998. Sole proprietor, managing member, Catherine M. Sterling. Arthur had never dissolved this entity. When he founded Sterling Dynamics later, he simply transferred the assets, illegally, technically, from the entity he thought was his, but was actually hers. He had assumed that because they were married, what was hers was his. He had assumed she was just handling the paperwork because he was too busy. He had built a skyscraper on land he didn't own. "We have to wait," Harrison reminded her. "If we show this now, he'll settle. He'll offer you $500 million to make it go away." Catherine looked up. "I don't want the money, Harrison." "I know," the lawyer said softly. "You want the truth." "I want him to say it," Catherine said. "I want him to stand in court, in front of God and Isabella and the cameras, and say that I am nothing. I want him to commit to the lie so deeply that when the floor drops out, he falls forever." "Then we go to trial," Harrison said. "We let him hit you. We let him humiliate you. We let him think he's winning until the very last second." The weeks dragged on. The pre-trial hearings were brutal. Arthur's lawyer, Silas Blackwood, buried Catherine in paperwork. They demanded receipts for grocery shopping from 2010. They demanded proof that she had contributed to the household chores. They tried to argue that her lack of income for 20 years meant she owed Arthur money for supporting her lifestyle. It was psychological warfare. Arthur wanted her to break. He wanted her to scream, cry, or beg. But Catherine remained silent. She showed up to every deposition, dressed in simple grey suits, answering questions with yes, no, or I do not recall. She gave them nothing. Arthur took her silence for weakness. "She's broken," Arthur told Isabella over a lobster dinner at Per Se. "She knows she has no case. We're going to crush her in court next week. It'll be a formality." Isabella swirled her wine. "Make sure you wear the navy suit," she said. "It makes you look powerful. I want the sketch artist to get your good side when you win." The morning of the trial, the steps of the New York State Supreme Court were swarming with paparazzi. Arthur had leaked the trial date. He wanted an audience. He arrived in a black Escalade, stepping out like a movie star. He wore a custom Tom Ford suit, navy blue, with a silk tie that cost more than Catherine's monthly rent. Isabella was with him, despite the advice of his legal team. She wore a white dress that looked suspiciously like a wedding gown cut to cocktail length and oversized sunglasses. She held Arthur's hand, waving to the cameras. They looked like the royal family of capitalism. "Mr. Sterling! Mr. Sterling! Is it true you're offering your ex-wife $0? A reporter shouted. Arthur paused, flashing a winning smile. "I believe in fairness, but I also believe that you keep what you kill. I built this company. The courts will recognize that." Catherine arrived 10 minutes later, in a yellow taxi. She wore a charcoal suit and low heels. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She carried a single leather tote bag. Harrison Tobias walked beside her, looking like a grumpy bulldog in a rumpled trench coat. No one took their picture. Inside, courtroom 314 was packed. The gallery was filled with journalists, curious onlookers, and Arthur's entourage, a collection of junior executives and sycophants who wanted to see the boss destroy his enemy. Isabella sat in the front row directly behind the defense table. She crossed her legs and placed her designer handbag prominently on the bench. When Catherine walked in, Isabella let out a loud, theatrical sigh of boredom. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Whitman entered. He was an older man, approaching 70, with thick glasses and a reputation for hating time-wasters. He didn't look at the cameras. He didn't look at the audience. He sat down, opened the file, and glared at the lawyers. "This is Sterling v. Sterling," Judge Whitman grumbled. "I've read the briefs. Mr. Blackwood, you're representing the petitioner, Mr. Sterling. Mr. Tobias, you're for the respondent." "Ready, Your Honor," Silas Blackwood said smoothly, his voice like oiled velvet. "Ready, Your Honor," Harrison rasped. "Opening statements," the judge ordered. Silas Blackwood stood up. He buttoned his jacket and turned to the courtroom, treating the jury box, though there was no jury, this was a bench trial, as his stage. "Your Honor," Silas began, pacing confidently. "This case is simple. It is about ambition versus apathy. It is about a man, Arthur Sterling, who worked 18-hour days for 20 years to build Sterling Dynamics into a global powerhouse. A man who sacrificed his sleep, his health, and his sanity to change the world of logistics." He pointed an accusatory finger at Catherine, who sat staring at her hands. "And it is about a woman who enjoyed the fruits of that labor without planting a single seed. Catherine Sterling has not been employed since 1999. She has contributed 0 capital to the business. She has no background in business administration. She was a housewife. And while there is dignity in that role, it does not entitle her to 50% of a billion-dollar tech empire. We are here to ask the court to enforce a fair separation of assets that Arthur Sterling alone created. Isabella nodded vigorously from the gallery, whispering, "Exactly," loud enough for the back row to hear. Silas sat down, looking pleased. Harrison Tobias stood up. He didn't pace. He didn't wave his arms. He stood behind his table, leaning on his knuckles. "Your Honor," Harrison said, his voice low. "Mr. Sterling is a great salesman. No one denies that. He has sold the world a story. He has sold the investors a story. And now he is trying to sell this court a story." Harrison looked at Arthur. Arthur smirked back. "The evidence will show," Harrison continued, "that the foundation of Sterling Dynamics is not Arthur Sterling's ambition. It is Catherine Sterling's intellect. We will prove that the petitioner is not the sole architect of this fortune, but merely the tenant of a house his wife built. And when the lease is up, the tenant has to leave." The courtroom murmured. Arthur rolled his eyes and whispered something to Silas. Silas chuckled. Desperate tactics, they thought. "Call your first witness," Judge Whitman said, looking bored. "I call the petitioner, Arthur Sterling," Silas announced. Arthur took the stand with the grace of a talk show host. He swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, his hand resting lightly on the Bible. Silas Blackwood walked him through the easy questions first. Name, occupation, the success of the recent IPO. It was a victory lap. "Mr. Sterling," Silas asked, leaning against the railing, "let's talk about the inception of the company. Who came up with the proprietary algorithm that Sterling Dynamics uses to track global shipping?" "I did," Arthur said firmly. "It came to me in a dream, actually. Back in '98, I woke up, grabbed a notepad, and sketched out the logic flow. I spent the next 6 months coding it myself in our basement." "Did your wife, Catherine, assist you with this coding?" Arthur laughed. It was a condescending, rich sound. "Catherine? No. Catherine is a wonderful woman in her own way, but she struggles to program the microwave. She's not technical. She was busy with, well, I'm not sure what she did all day, but it certainly wasn't coding." In the gallery, Isabella giggled. "So, to be clear," Silas pressed, ensuring the record was spotless, "you are the sole creator of the intellectual property?" "I am." "And the company structure? Who set that up?" "I did," Arthur lied. "I handled all the filings. I built this from the ground up, brick by brick." "Thank you, Mr. Sterling." Silas sat down, looking at Harrison Tobias with a challenging stare. "Your turn, old man." Harrison Tobias stood up slowly. He picked up a single file folder. He walked to the witness stand. He didn't look angry. He looked curious. "Mr. Sterling," Harrison began, "congratulations on the IPO. Truly impressive numbers." "Thank you," Arthur said, adjusting his cufflinks. "The market rewards excellence." "Indeed. You just stated that you wrote the code yourself in 1998, in a basement." "That is correct. And you stated my client, Catherine, has no technical literacy." "That is also correct. She's a Luddite, really." Harrison nodded. He pulled a piece of paper from his folder. "I have here a copy of your college transcript from Boston University, dating from 1996. Can you read your grade in Intro to Computer Science for the court?" Arthur stiffened. "I don't recall." "It says F," Harrison read. "You failed the course, and you dropped out of the retake." Arthur's face flushed slightly. "College isn't the real world. Bill Gates dropped out. I taught myself." "Of course," Harrison said. "Self-taught. Very admirable. Now you also claimed you handled the corporate filings. You incorporated the company." "Yes. In Delaware, 2005. 2005, Harrison repeated. But the company was operating before that, wasn't it? You were taking contracts in 2001, 2002. Under what entity were you doing business? Arthur hesitated. He looked at Silas. Silas frowned. This wasn't in the prep. We were a sole proprietorship. Just me doing business as myself, Arthur improvised. A sole proprietorship, Harrison repeated. He walked back to his table and picked up a thicker document. Mr. Sterling, do you recognize the name Argos Shipping? They were our first major client, Arthur said proudly. I closed that deal over a steak dinner. In 2002, Harrison noted, a $3 million contract. Yes. A $3 million contract requires a tax ID number, Mr. Sterling. It requires a corporate bank account. You can't cash a $3 million check at an ATM. Arthur shifted in his seat. The leather creaked. My accountants handled the details. I focused on the big picture. Harrison turned to the judge. Your Honor, I would like to enter Exhibit A into evidence. He handed a document to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. He handed a copy to Silas Blackwood. Silas looked at the document and went pale. He whispered a curse word that echoed in the silent courtroom. Mr. Sterling, Harrison said, his voice hardening. Please look at Exhibit A. This is the contract with Argos Shipping from 2002. Can you read the name of the service provider listed at the top of page 1? Arthur squinted at the paper. He licked his lips. It says Sterling Logistics Solutions, LLC. And who signed on behalf of Sterling Logistics Solutions, LLC? Arthur's eyes scanned down to the signature line. He stopped. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't his signature. It was a neat, precise cursive he hadn't seen in years. It appears to be Catherine's signature. Catherine's signature, Harrison repeated, booming. And why would your wife, who struggles to program a microwave, be signing the primary contract for your business 3 years before you claim you started it? I must have been out of town, Arthur stammered. I told her to sign it for me. It was administrative. Administrative, Harrison mocked. Mr. Sterling, are you aware that signing a contract as an officer of a company you don't legally represent is fraud? I owned the company. It didn't matter who signed, Arthur shouted, losing his cool. It was my company. She was just the wife. Was she? Harrison asked. Or was she the owner? Objection. Silas Blackwood jumped up, knocking his water glass over. Argumentative, leading the witness. Overruled, Judge Whitman said sharply. He was looking at the document with intense interest. He looked over his glasses at Catherine Sterling, who sat perfectly still, her face a mask of stone. I have no further questions for this witness at this time, Harrison said calmly. But I reserve the right to recall him after we introduce Exhibit B. Harrison sat down. Arthur sat in the witness box, breathing hard. He looked at Isabella. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was looking at him with confusion, her sunglasses pushed up onto her head. Arthur stepped down and walked back to his table. He leaned over to Silas. What is Exhibit B? Arthur hissed. Silas was frantically texting on his phone, sweat beading on his forehead. I don't know, Arthur. But whatever it is, Tobias looked like he was holding a hand grenade. Judge Whitman banged his gavel. Court is adjourned for lunch until 1:30 p.m. When we return, Mr. Tobias, you may proceed with your case in chief. As the room cleared, Arthur grabbed Catherine's arm as she tried to pass. What are you doing, Cat? He whispered, his voice shaking with rage. You're going to embarrass us both. Just take the settlement. Catherine looked at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. Her eyes were cold. I'm not embarrassed, Arthur, she said softly. I'm just getting started. She pulled her arm free and walked out, leaving him standing there. The mistress, Isabella, walked up to him, looking annoyed. "Why is she so confident?" Isabella demanded. "You said she was stupid." Arthur watched Catherine disappear through the heavy oak doors. A knot of dread, cold and heavy, began to form in his stomach. "She is," Arthur lied, trying to convince himself. "She's bluffing. She has to be." But as he walked out into the hallway, Arthur Sterling realized for the first time in 20 years that he didn't know what his wife was capable of, and that terrified him. The lunch break was a tense affair. While Catherine and Harrison ate sandwiches in a quiet conference room, reviewing their strategy, Arthur dragged his team to Le Coucou, a high-end French restaurant 3 blocks from the courthouse. He ordered a bottle of wine that cost $400, but he was drinking it like it was water. Isabella was scrolling through her phone, her brow furrowed. The initial rush of being the center of attention was fading, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. "Arthur," she said, putting her phone down, "why are people on Twitter saying you committed fraud?" The Wall Street Journal just posted a live blog of the trial. They're talking about the signature. Arthur slammed his glass down. "They don't know anything. It's a technicality. Catherine signed one paper 20 years ago. It means nothing. I built the empire. Possession is 9/10 of the law." Silas Blackwood, who was nursing a migraine and a club soda, looked up. "Actually, Arthur, in intellectual property law, possession is 0/10. Documentation is everything. If Catherine can prove she owns the underlying IP, Sterling Dynamics is effectively leasing its core product from her. And if she decides to terminate that lease—" "She can't," Arthur snapped. "She's my wife, or ex-wife. It's marital property. We split it." "Not if the IP belongs to a separate entity she owned before the marriage, or one she kept separate," Silas warned. "Did you ever formally buy the rights from Sterling Logistics Solutions?" Arthur stared at him. "I just changed the name on the door, Silas. I thought it was the same thing." Silas closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. "You didn't merge the entities? You didn't do an asset transfer?" "I was busy making millions." "Arthur," Isabella cut in, her voice sharp. Does this mean the money isn't yours?" Arthur looked at his mistress. For the first time, he didn't see adoration. He saw calculation. He saw a woman doing math in her head and realizing the equation might result in a negative number. "Don't worry," Arthur lied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'll crush her this afternoon. Watch." Back in courtroom 314, the atmosphere had shifted. The air was heavier. The journalists were typing furiously on their laptops. Judge Whitman looked like a man who had skipped lunch to read case law. "Mr. Tobias," the judge said, "call your next witness." Harrison Tobias stood up. "The defense calls Dr. Catherine Sterling." A ripple of surprise went through the room. "Doctor," someone whispered. Arthur scoffed audibly. "Honorary doctorate, probably," he muttered to Isabella. Catherine took the stand. She looked different than she had in the hallway. The hesitation was gone. She sat with the posture of a CEO. "Mrs. Sterling," Harrison began. "Or should I say, Dr. Sterling, can you clarify your educational background for the court?" "I hold a bachelor's in mathematics from the University of Chicago and a master's in computer science from MIT, Catherine said clearly. "I completed my PhD in algorithmic efficiency, though I didn't walk for graduation because I was pregnant with our son, Leo." Arthur blinked. He had forgotten about the PhD. He always told people she dabbled in computers. "Thank you," Harrison said. "Now let's talk about 1998, the year Sterling Dynamics, or its precursor, was born. Arthur testified he wrote the code in a basement. Is that true?" Arthur has never written a line of functional code in his life, Catherine said. Her voice was calm, factual. He is a visionary salesman. He understands what people want, but he doesn't know how to build it. Objection. Silas stood up. Hearsay. Opinion. I can prove it, Catherine said, cutting him off. She looked at the judge. Your Honor, if I may? Judge Whitman nodded. Proceed. Harrison walked to the projection screen set up in the corner. Your Honor, this is Exhibit B. It is a digital forensic copy of the original hard drive from the Sterling household, dated December 1998. On the screen, lines of complex code appeared. It was green text on a black background, old school, raw and dense. This is the kernel, Catherine explained, pointing to the screen. This is the brain of the logistics algorithm. It's what makes the shipping routes efficient. It's worth billions today. And who wrote this? Harrison asked. I did, Catherine said. How can we be sure? Catherine smiled. It was a small, dangerous smile. Because, like many programmers, I leave comments in my code, notes to myself. Arthur wouldn't know how to read them, let alone remove them. He just compiled the executable file and sold it. Can you show us? Scroll to line 4500, Catherine instructed. Harrison scrolled down. The text blurred by until it stopped. There, buried in the middle of a complex mathematical function, was a line of text in grey comments. Code property of C. Sterling. Written while Arthur is passed out at Shenanigan's pub. If this code is running, I hope it's paying the rent. Cat, Nov 12, 1998. The courtroom erupted. Journalists gasped. A few laughed. Arthur's face turned a violent shade of red. He gripped the table so hard his knuckles turned white. Isabella looked at the screen, then at Arthur, her mouth slightly open. Order! Judge Whitman banged his gavel. Order in the court! When the noise subsided, Harrison turned back to Catherine. So you wrote the code, and you formed the LLC, as we saw in Exhibit A. Did you ever transfer this code, or the ownership of that LLC, to Arthur Sterling? No, Catherine said. I granted him a verbal license to use it to start the business. I wanted him to succeed. I loved him. I thought we were partners. A verbal license, Harrison repeated. Revocable at will? Yes, Catherine said. Harrison turned to the judge. Your Honor, we have established that the respondent, Catherine Sterling, is the creator and owner of the core intellectual property. We have established that the original corporate entity, Sterling Logistics Solutions, was solely in her name. The petitioner, Arthur Sterling, simply took the product, slapped a new sticker on it, and went public. Silas Blackwood stood up, looking desperate. Your Honor, this is absurd. The IPO, the shareholders, Sterling Dynamics has been operating for 20 years. There is a concept of adverse possession, of implied consent. Catherine accepted the money from the company for decades. I accepted money from my husband, Catherine corrected him from the stand. I didn't take a salary. I didn't take dividends. I was a housewife provided for by her husband. That is not a corporate transaction. Judge Whitman took off his glasses. He cleaned them slowly with a handkerchief. The silence in the room was suffocating. The ticking of the wall clock sounded like a bomb counting down. The judge put his glasses back on and looked directly at Arthur Sterling. Mr. Sterling, the judge said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of finality. Arthur stood up, his legs shaking slightly. Yes, Your Honor? You are asking this court to grant you 100% of the company because you claim it is your separate property, created before the marriage or by your sole effort. Yes, Your Honor, I am the face of the company. I am Sterling Dynamics. The face, yes. the judge mused. But the brain appears to be sitting in the witness box. The judge picked up the incorporation documents for Sterling Dynamics, the new company Arthur had formed. Mr. Sterling, the judge continued, I am looking at your corporate filings for Sterling Dynamics. In the section where it asks for assets transferred from previous entities, you listed intellectual property and algorithms. You signed a sworn statement that you owned those algorithms. I thought I did, Arthur stammered. But you didn't, the judge said. You didn't own the code. You didn't own the original LLC. You didn't own the copyright. Then the judge asked the question that shattered Arthur's world. Mr. Sterling, if you do not own the algorithm, and you do not own the original LLC that holds the patent rights, then who exactly owns the company you just took public? Arthur opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Silas. Silas looked at the floor. He looked at Isabella. Isabella was staring at him with a look of pure horror. It wasn't the horror of a woman worried about her lover. It was the horror of a woman realizing she had bet on a horse that didn't just break a leg. It didn't even exist. Arthur rasped. I own the brand. You own a logo, the judge corrected brutally, and a marketing list. But based on the evidence presented today, it appears Mrs. Sterling owns the engine. And without the engine, Mr. Sterling, your car is just a very expensive paperweight. The judge turned to the stenographer. Let the record show that the court finds a significant discrepancy in the ownership structure of Sterling Dynamics. I am issuing a temporary injunction. All assets of Sterling Dynamics, including the funds raised from the IPO, are frozen effective immediately pending a forensic audit of the intellectual property rights. Frozen. The word hung in the air. Isabella stood up. She didn't wait for permission. The veneer of the supportive girlfriend cracked and fell away instantly. Frozen, she screeched, her voice losing its cultured affectation and revealing the sharp edge of panic. What do you mean frozen? What about the yacht? What about the transfer? Sit down, Mum, the bailiff barked. Arthur turned to her, pleading. Bella, it's just a delay, we'll fix it. Isabella looked at him, and then she looked at Catherine. Catherine was still in the witness box, her face serene, unmovable. Isabella laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. You idiot, she hissed at Arthur, loud enough for the microphones to pick up. You told me she was nothing. You told me you were the genius. You're nothing but a fraud. She grabbed her handbag. I'm not going down with this ship. I have a flight to catch. Bella! Arthur cried out, reaching for her. She swatted his hand away. Don't touch me. Call me when you're a billionaire again, which looks like never. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the courtroom, the click-clack of her heels sounding like gunshots. Arthur stood alone, his hand still outstretched, as the gallery erupted into chaos. Flashbulbs went off. Reporters shouted questions. Arthur slowly turned back to look at the judge, and then at Catherine. Catherine stood up from the witness chair. She smoothed her skirt. She looked at Arthur, the man who had discarded her like trash, the man who was now standing in the ruins of his own ego. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply walked past him, her head high. I think we're done for the day, Arthur, she said as she passed. Judge Whitman banged the gavel. Court adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow. And Mr. Blackwood, I suggest you and your client spend the evening reading up on perjury laws. Arthur sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. The silence of the empty penthouse awaited him. The yacht was frozen. The mistress was gone. And the wife he had underestimated held the keys to everything. But Catherine wasn't done yet. The victory in court was one thing. The karmic justice was another. And she had one final card to play to ensure he could never hurt anyone again. The news of the injunction hit the markets like a meteor strike. By the time court reconvened the next morning, Sterling Dynamics stock had plummeted from 64 sources to 12 antolls. Trading was halted twice due to volatility. The headline on the Wall Street Journal was no longer about Arthur's genius. It was, "The billion-dollar lie, founder Arthur Sterling exposed in IP scandal." Arthur didn't show up to court in a Tom Ford suit. He wore a rumpled grey jacket, and he looked like he hadn't slept in 24 hours. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his tie. The arrogant posture was gone, replaced by the slump of a defeated man. Isabella was notably absent. Her Instagram, which had been a stream of yacht photos and champagne toasts just yesterday, was now deactivated. She had vanished into the ether, likely scouting for a new benefactor in Dubai or Monaco. She had bet on a king and realized she was holding a joker. Catherine arrived looking fresh, rested, and formidable. She sat beside Harrison Tobias, who was practically humming with delight. "Your Honor," Silas Blackwood said, his voice hoarse, "my client would like to request a recess to discuss settlement options." Judge Whitman peered over his glasses. "A settlement? Yesterday you were arguing for total victory, Mr. Blackwood. You claimed the plaintiff had contributed zero capital." "Circumstances have changed," Silas admitted painfully, staring at the floor. "I imagine they have," the judge said dryly. "Mr. Tobias?" Harrison looked at Catherine. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "We are willing to hear their offer," Harrison said. They adjourned to a private conference room. The air was stale, smelling of old coffee and desperation. Arthur sat at the far end of the mahogany table, unable to meet Catherine's eyes. "We offer a 50-50 split of all marital assets," Silas began, trying to salvage some dignity. "Arthur keeps the company name and the CEO position. Catherine gets half the stock value, once it recovers, and the Hamptons estate." Harrison laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. "Arthur doesn't have a company to keep, Silas. The injunction means he can't use the code. Without the code, Sterling Dynamics is just a shell. It's worthless. It's a shiny car with no engine." "Then what do you want?" Arthur snapped, his voice cracking. "You want blood? You want me on the street? Is that it, Cat? You want to see me begging?" Catherine looked at him. Her expression wasn't angry, it was pitiful. "I don't want you to beg, Arthur. I want you to admit it." "Admit what?" "That you didn't build it. That you used me. That for 20 years, while I raised our son and wrote your code and managed your life, you looked at me as an accessory, and when you thought you were big enough, you tried to throw me away." Arthur gritted his teeth. "I was the face. I sold it. You couldn't have done it without me." "Maybe," Catherine conceded. "But you certainly couldn't have done it without me. And yet, you tried to take 100%. She slid a document across the table. "Here is the deal," Catherine said. "I take full ownership of Sterling Dynamics. You resign as CEO immediately. You surrender your board seat. You keep the Tribeca penthouse and the cars. You get a severance package of $5 million. $5 million, Arthur shouted, standing up. "I was worth $1 billion yesterday. And today you're worth an indictment for perjury and securities fraud," Harrison reminded him, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "If Catherine goes back into that courtroom and presses for a criminal referral regarding the forged signature on the Argos contract, you won't be worrying about money. You'll be worrying about prison." Arthur froze. The reality of the Exhibit A signature forgery and his sworn statements to the SEC crashed down on him. He realized with sudden clarity that he wasn't negotiating a divorce anymore. He was negotiating his freedom. You would send me to jail? Arthur whispered, looking at his wife. I'm offering you a lifeboat, Catherine said. It's a small one, but it floats. Take the 5 million, keep the apartment, and walk away. If you fight this, I will bury you under so much litigation that your grandchildren will be paying the legal fees. Arthur looked at Silas. Silas nodded grimly. It's the best deal you're going to get, Arthur. If the SEC investigates the IP ownership... Arthur slumped. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured tire. He took a pen from his pocket, a Mont Blanc Catherine had given him for their 10th anniversary, and signed the paper with a trembling hand. Done, he whispered. Catherine stood up. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt a profound sense of closure. She picked up the signed agreement. Goodbye, Arthur, she said. She walked out of the conference room, leaving him alone in the silence of his own making. 6 months later. The rebranding of Sterling Dynamics was subtle but powerful. The stock had recovered, stabilizing at a healthy $45 a share, driven by investor confidence in the new leadership. The market liked stability, and Catherine Sterling was nothing if not stable. Catherine sat in the corner office. It didn't look like Arthur's office anymore. The ego walls of magazine covers were gone. Instead, there were white boards covered in schematics, comfortable chairs for collaboration, and photos of her son, Leo. Her assistant buzzed in. Ms. Sterling, the board meeting starts in 5 minutes, and your son is on line 1. Catherine smiled. Put him through. Hey, Mom, Leo's voice came through, bright and cheerful. Just saw the news. Forbes named you CEO of the year. Not bad for a Luddite. Catherine laughed. Don't be cheeky. How's Yale? Good. Listen, I saw Dad yesterday. Catherine's smile faded slightly. Oh, how is he? He's... Okay. He sold the penthouse, said the maintenance fees were too high. He's living in a smaller place in Jersey City now. He looks older, Mum. He asked about you. What did he say? He asked if you were happy, and he said he was sorry. I think he actually meant it this time. I hope he finds peace, Leo, Catherine said sincerely. But my happiness isn't his concern anymore. I know. You're doing great, Mum. I'm proud of you. I love you, Leo. Catherine hung up and walked to the window. The city sprawled out below her, a grid of lights and possibilities. She thought about the last 20 years, the sacrifices, the silence, the feeling of being invisible. And then she thought about the last 6 months. She had cleaned house. She had fired the sycophants and promoted the engineers who actually did the work. She had started a scholarship fund for women in STEM. She was building something real, not just a monument to one man's ego. She walked into the boardroom. The chatter stopped immediately. 12 men and women in suits turned to look at her. There was no dismissal in their eyes now. There was only respect. Good morning, Catherine said, taking her seat at the head of the table. Let's get to work. We have a new logistics algorithm to deploy, and this time the code is flawless. Arthur Sterling sat on a park bench in Liberty State Park, looking across the water at the Manhattan skyline. He held a coffee in a paper cup. His suit was off the rack, and his shoes were scuffed. He watched a ferry cut through the water. It was a Sterling Dynamics cargo ship. He saw the logo he had designed, but he knew the engine inside was hers. A young woman sat down on the other end of the bench, reading a magazine. Arthur glanced over. The cover of Time magazine featured a striking black and white photo of Catherine, looking strong and wise. The headline read, The Quiet Architect, Catherine Sterling on Reclaiming Her Power. Arthur stared at the photo. He remembered the night at the museum when he had ignored her to flirt with Isabella. He remembered thinking she was just background noise. "She looks incredible, doesn't she?" the young woman on the bench said, noticing his stare. "She's my hero. She took down a tyrant and saved the company." Arthur swallowed the lump in his throat. He looked at the girl, then back at the magazine. "Yes," Arthur said softly. "She is incredible. I used to know her." "Really?" the girl asked. "What was she like?" Arthur looked at the skyline, where the sun was glinting off the glass of the building he used to own. "She was the smartest person in the room," Arthur said, a sad smile touching his lips. "And the only one who didn't need to say it." He stood up, tossed his empty coffee cup in the trash, and walked away into the crowd. Just another face in the city, while Catherine Sterling's legacy continued to rise. And that is how Arthur Sterling lost $1 billion empire, because he forgot who built the foundation he was standing on. He mistook Catherine's silence for weakness, and her patience for submission. But in the end, the truth, and the code, always reveals itself. Whatever happened to Isabella, rumor has it she's currently engaged to an 80-year-old oil tycoon in Texas. Some people never change. But Catherine? She proved that you don't need to be the loudest voice in the room to be the most powerful. Sometimes, you just need to be the one who owns the signature. What a roller coaster. It just goes to show, never underestimate the quiet ones, and always read the fine print, especially if your spouse is a genius. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We post new drama every Tuesday and Friday. What do you think? Did Arthur deserve to lose everything, or was Catherine too harsh? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.